few weeks ago, we did a video starting a new series where we do a crash course on Japanese guitar brands. The idea of this series is to do a quick overview of some of my favorite Japanese guitar brands, as well as some of the ones you guys have mentioned in the comments. So this isn't a total deep dive. We'll save those for their own dedicated videos. But if you want to learn about more Japanese guitar brands, then let's dig into it. We're starting strong here. We're gonna start with Yamaha. Yamaha is a wild company. If you ask me to pick my favorite company that's currently producing boat motors as well as musical instruments, I'd probably have to go with Yamaha. Yamaha is probably the oldest brand that we're gonna talk about in this series. The story begins in 1887 when Torakusu Yamaha founded the Nippon Gaki Company, which did begin with musical instruments, focusing on the manufacturing of pianos and reed organs. During World War II, the Japanese government would contract the Nippon Gaki Company to make airplane propellers as well as some other items needed for the ongoing war. Right in the middle of that, in 1942, the Nippon Gaki Company would begin manufacturing classical acoustic guitars. Well, not specific to their guitar line, I think it's worth noting, in 1955, Yamaha would release their first motorcycle, the YA1, and this would start the Yamaha Motor Company, which would massively grow over the years, both in their product offering and popularity. From this point on, Yamaha does more or less operate their motor company and their musical instruments division completely separately, so while they are both under the Yamaha brand, they are pretty much different companies. About a decade after that, in 1966, Yamaha would release their first electric guitars, the SG2 and SG3. These guitars definitely took inspiration from the Fender Jaguar with their offset body, but they still did their own thing. The SG model would evolve and take on a new shape. By 1972, it would appear closer to a Gibson Les Paul with its single cutaway, and by the mid-70s, the SG1000 would be introduced with its double cutaway body. This is a 1982 Yamaha SG1000, and I know for a lot of people, when you picture a vintage Yamaha electric guitar, this is the one you think of. Let's plug this in and see what it sounds like. I always hear people refer to the SG1000 as like a Les Paul killer. I don't know if I 100% agree with that because it isn't exactly like a Les Paul, and there's definitely things about a Les Paul that I enjoy more. But there's also things about this that I think are really great that you wouldn't get out of a Les Paul. I know Santana is kind of infamous for using one of these. These sound great, they play great. This one in particular got a nice dark ebony board on that. Fantastic craftsmanship throughout, which is obviously consistent with what you would expect for any Japanese brand, but especially Yamaha. This is just a very solid workhorse guitar. It's a little on the heavier end, but it sounds good, it plays good, and what's not to love? During the 70s and 80s, Yamaha would definitely participate in the trend of making American-style guitars like the Les Paul or the Strat for the Japanese domestic market. But I would say they weren't as egregious as brands like Greco and Tokai. Yamaha still had their own models, but you'd also see them do stuff like the Super Rock and Roller, which is extremely derivative to say the least. I don't know, when you look at a Yamaha catalog, it kind of shows that like they did the Strat thing, they did the Les Paul thing, but they probably had more interest in doing their own thing with the SG and the Flying Samurai and the many other offerings that they had at the time. Looking at where things are at today, Yamaha is still making fantastic quality guitars, with many of their top shelf models still being made in Japan. Over the recent decades, they've definitely put a lot of effort into manufacturing in more cost-effective countries like Taiwan and China, and making kind of a more cost-effective import line as well as their Japanese guitars. Well, some of these non-Japan made Yamaha guitars are definitely not to the same quality level as Japan. I'd still say they're pretty solid for what they are for the most part. Really within every price bracket, I would say that their quality control is still really strong. While I can't say that I've loved every single Taiwan or Chinese made Yamaha acoustic I've picked up, I'd say if you know what to expect, they're still good for what they are. I know for a lot of new players, you kind of go into a shop and you're looking at a lot of these Taiwan and Chinese made Yamaha acoustics, and for a lot of people that is their entry point into acoustic guitar or just guitar playing in general. I know for me, my first acoustic was a Taiwan-made Yamaha, and it served me well while I was learning. I've made it no secret on our channel that I absolutely love the Yamaha brand. I love so many of the models they have to offer, and I really love finding a lot of these older Yamaha electric and acoustic guitars made in Japan. The next brand that we're going to talk about is Morris. When we put out the first episode of this series, I saw a ton of comments mentioning Morris, so let's talk about them. Toshio Moridaira founded Morris Guitars in 1967 in Nagano, Japan. Now, making these Morris guitars was not his first experience in the guitar industry. He previously had experience in music retail and was actually the first distributor to carry both Fender and Gibson guitars in Japan. During his time working with Gibson, he was able to visit their factory in 1964, which at the time was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. This was able to teach him a ton about Gibson's manufacturing, and being that this was pre-internet era, this was a pretty huge advantage to have as a Japanese guitar manufacturer. While there was plenty of other manufacturers in the game at the time in Japan, I don't know if any of them can say that they traveled to Gibson to see their factory. As well as learning about the manufacturing process, a Gibson employee gave Mr. Moridaira the nickname Mori, which stuck and led to the name Morris for his acoustic guitar line that he would start just a few years later. The company originally focused on producing high-quality Gibson and Martin-style acoustic guitars for a Japanese market that did not see as wide distribution of these brands. Not only were the Morris guitars more readily available than Gibson or Martin guitars, but they're also much more cost-effective, making them a really appealing option at the time. In the 70s, Morris would bring some of these guitars over to the US, but it seems that most of their offerings would remain in Japan. Here we have a 1978 Morris WH-20, obviously quite reminiscent of the Gibson Hummingbird. Let's see what it sounds like. Overall, very solid acoustic. I really like this one. This definitely reminds me a lot of the Hummingbirds that Gibson was making at the time. This example is from 1978. While we were working on an upcoming video on Norland era Gibson, we checked out a 1977 Hummingbird Custom, and it had a lot in common with this guitar. Both sound-wise, aesthetic-wise, and even playing-wise, this definitely does a really good job of recreating that. Now, my personal preference for Hummingbirds would definitely be something from the 60s, and this is not that. This does not play, sound, or feel like a 60s Hummingbird, but if you like some of the more Norland era 70s stuff, this is definitely pretty close, not just in aesthetics, but also playability and sound. And you even get a volute. If you're looking for a 60s style Hummingbird, this is probably not the place to go, but if you like this for what it is, definitely worth checking out. I'd say this definitely had to be a very solid option at the time given what was out there in the Japanese market in the late 70s. We are on to our final brand for this video. That is Ibanez. Ibanez is easily one of the most popular, if not the most popular, of the Japanese guitar brands, and they have a really cool story, so let's dig in a little bit. The story of Ibanez guitar starts all the way back in 1908 when the bookstore chain Hoshino Shoten decided to start carrying musical instruments. In order to facilitate this, they started the Hoshino Gakki Company, which is still the parent company of Ibanez today. In 1935, the now well-established Hoshino Gakki Company decided to start producing their own guitars and released their first Ibanez Salvador Spanish-style acoustic guitars, named after the Spanish luthier Salvador Ibanez. Throughout the late 50s and early 60s, the Ibanez Company we would know today would really start to take shape. They began contracting factories such as Suzuki, Gaitone, Taisco, and even making instruments in their own Tama factory. After the closure of both their Tama factory and the Taisco factory, the Hoshino Gakki Company needed a new place to manufacture their instruments, and they landed on the famed Fujigen factory. Like many Japanese guitar brands at the time, Ibanez was producing many Gibson and Fender style guitars throughout the 60s and 70s, but in 1977, that would all slow down. At this time, Norland, the parent company of Gibson, would file a lawsuit against Elgar, Hoshino Gakki's USA distributor, which would later be known as Hoshino USA. The lawsuit was regarding their infringement of Gibson's open book headstock shape. By 1978, this lawsuit would be settled outside of court. I think it's worth noting that a lot of people refer to this whole era of Japanese guitar production of American style guitars as the lawsuit era. Really, the lawsuit was only against Ibanez. They didn't go after any of the other companies, and really the only reason they went after Ibanez was because Ibanez was starting to export their stuff to the US market. A lot of these other Japanese guitar manufacturers while they were making Gibson or Fender style guitars, they're mostly making them for the Japanese domestic market, and they weren't exporting them. I was talking to one of my Japanese friends about this whole situation and how they can't make the open book headstock shape here, but companies will use it over in Japan. And his perspective on it was that in Japan, they don't see it as a problem that other companies want to use the open book headstock design. They don't think that these companies are trying to trick people to think that they're buying a Gibson. They're just doing it because that's like the traditional shape of a guitar headstock of that style. In the US, these brands are trying to protect their intellectual property to prohibit further brands from trying to copy other aspects of their designs. So they're going to be a bit more stringent, whereas in Japan, it's kind of more of like, you know, you're not buying a Gibson, you know you're buying a Fender. So they didn't see it as problematic that these companies wanted to use those designs. During the 70s and 80s, Ibanez would collaborate with the Kondo Shokai company, who owned the Fujigen factory. In the Japanese market, the Greco branded Mirage and EX800 guitars would be released, while the same guitars would be branded as Ibanez under the Iceman and Destroyer models for the US release. These guitars are the same guitars with the same specs and are otherwise identical. Something interesting that I've noticed, which is I get asked a lot of times when we go on our trips to Japan to look for specific Ibanez models from this era, but a lot of times they're actually more common here in the States, as a lot of them are made for the US market. I think a lot of people think you're gonna go over to Japan and see a bunch of Ibanez Icemans and Destroyers and all kinds of other stuff from that time period. But I think more of that actually ended up here, whereas what you'll see in Japan is the Greco branded stuff, which we definitely do run into from time to time. Here we have a 1984 Fujigen-made Ibanez DT450, or the Destroyer 2. This is one of Ibanez's more original designs. Obviously, it does take cues from the Explorer, but this is nowhere near as close to the Explorer as the original Destroyer series would be. So I would say this definitely does its own thing. Let's plug it in and see what it sounds like. This is very, very sick. I would say very different from a Gibson Explorer and even quite different from the original version of the Ibanez Destroyer. This guitar definitely exhibits the top shelf craftsmanship that you would expect from the Fujigen factory, and I think is another example of why people hold these guitars in such high regard today. Throughout the decades, Ibanez has greatly widened their product offering, currently manufacturing everything from their lower priced Geo guitars made in China or Indonesia, all the way up to their high-end Ibanez J custom guitars still being made in Japan. Ibanez is one of the only companies that's really been able to nail so many different styles of guitar and actually gain popularity within their respective genre. From their shredder guitars to their widely celebrated semi-hollow and hollow body guitars, it's crazy how they've nailed both and a ton of great stuff in between too. It's really cool to see how many metal players are diehard Ibanez fans, as well as how many people in the jazz world also love Ibanez just as much, for very different reasons. Growing up, a ton of my friends had Ibanez guitars, but most of them would be the later era stuff, the Indonesian made or Chinese made or even Korean made stuff from like the RG series or the S series, and it really wasn't until I was doing a flash-footed gear that I was able to get my hands on some of the Japanese made stuff, whether it is like an older S series or something like the Destroyer 2 that we just looked at. Ibanez is one of the most iconic guitar manufacturers in the world today, and I think that they've definitely earned this title. I hope you guys have enjoyed hanging out with us today and checking out all of these guitars and all these different brands. We have a handful more of these episodes on the way, so be on the lookout for those. And if you have any ideas for future episodes, please let us know some brands you're into down below in the comments. Let me know if you have a favorite between all of these brands, or if there's any guitars that you guys have in your personal collections from any of these brands. We always love hearing your guys' thoughts and stories. If you're interested in any of the guitars in this video, you want to learn more info, or you're even looking at picking any of them up, we'd love if you checked out our inventory at flashfootofgear.com, or we're going to put a QR code on the screen here. I try to keep a pretty wide selection of Japanese guitar stock at all times, so if you're into this stuff, we would love if you took the time to check out our site. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share the video, and all that good stuff, and we will see you in another video soon. Bye.